Hi, welcome to the DRH show, where I have wide-ranging conversations with interesting people. We talk about all things psychology, mental health, and wellness. Today, I'm joined by a social and health psychologist and a professor at Northwestern University, Professor Judith Moskowitz. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, Professor Moskowitz. So let's start off with you telling us your backstory, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Oh, okay. You want the long version or the short version? It's a big question.
The interesting version.
Okay. Oh, that's a lot of pressure. Okay. So, as you said, I was trained as a social psychologist, specializing in emotions and stress and coping. And after graduate school, I took a postdoc position at the University of California, San Francisco, at the Center for AIDS Prevention Studies, where I joined a study that was looking at the stress of being a caregiver for a partner with AIDS. And we were really initially looking at what was stressful about caregiving. This was mid 1990s, so it was before the more effective treatments for AIDS. So many of our participants' partners, many of them were dying. So it became a study of not just the stress of caregiving, but also the stress of bereavement. So we were looking at what was stressful about caregiving, what was stressful about bereavement, and then pretty narrowly, what were they doing to cope with it? So we literally asked them to talk about stressful events that had happened in the past week, and then would hand them a questionnaire that had a list of things you might do in response to stressful events. So this is the ways of coping questionnaire. So it's things like, I tried to address the problem, or I tried not to think about it, or I prayed, or, there's a variety of things you can check off. And shortly after the start of the study, the participants said, well, you're only asking us about the bad things. You're not asking us about the good things that are happening in our lives. Which was a surprise to us, again, as stress and coping researchers, and really looking to learn more about stress. What the participants wanted to tell us was about positive emotions and positive experiences, and how those things were helping them cope with stress. So that sort of set me on this path. So we did start asking these questions. And even in the midst of this incredibly stressful experience, even if their partner had just died, they were able to talk about good things in their lives. And in fact, they seemed to have a need to do this. And that those who were able to see the good things that were happening alongside this incredible stress did better and were able to cope better. So that finding sort of set me on this path of looking not just at what's stressful about different types of life events or different chronic illnesses, but what positive can come out of it, or what kinds of good things that can be going on alongside the negative things, and how are these positive events and positive emotions, how are these helping people cope with the stress? So I set off on this path of studying positive emotion in the midst of stress, and how does positive emotion help you cope with stress, any kind of life stress, and what kinds of things can you do to have more positive emotion to cope with stress? So I was doing that at the University of California, San Francisco for about 20 years. And then 6 years ago, I moved here to Chicago to do the similar work at Northwestern University. So that's how I ended up where I am today.
And of course, you're really well known for your work about promoting positive affect. So if you could just talk to us about some of the interventions or toolkits that you've developed.
Mm-hmm. So when we started seeing this finding that positive emotions occurred in the course of stress and seemed to be helpful for people coping with the stress, I started looking for the next step. Once you've observed the finding, is like, okay, so if we help people have more positive emotion when they're coping with a stressful life event? Do they do better? How can you help them experience more positive emotion? Since I wasn't trained as a clinical psychologist, I'm not, still to this day, not that comfortable sort of, I can't think of it as messing with people, like changing. I've trained to observe behavior and measure behavior, but less comfortable trying to change it. But the findings were so compelling that it was clear to me that that was the next step. So I went to the literature, I looked for studies of things that can help you have more positive emotions. So some of them were basic lab studies where, people were brought in and, they're shown pictures of puppies and kittens or movie clips, happy movie clips. And those in the short term absolutely increase positive emotion. And that was one way to go. But I was really looking for sort of tools or skills or behaviors that people could make a practice as part of their day-to-day life. I mean, I suppose you could every day watch a positive movie clip to increase your positive emotion, but that's not really sustainable. So I went to things like acts of kindness or positive reframing. And I can talk about all these as we get more into it. But so I put together this set of 8, we've now expanded to about 10 things that you can do, that you can take up as a habit that can increase your positive emotion and then will help you cope better with stress. So the original package that we tested was noticing positive events. So, we all know that just by having something good happen in your life, that increases your positive emotion. That, we know. There's also data to support that. There's been research done showing that. So if you're able to notice the positive things going on, even when you're experiencing stress, that can help you. So we teach people how to notice positive events, how to make that a practice, how to savor those events. So how to sort of amplify or capitalize on them just by talking about them, putting them in your journal, putting them on social media, just thinking about the event later can help you have that hit of positive emotion. Gratitude, which is related to that, sort of just taking a moment. There's a lot of research now to show that if you intentionally notice things that you're grateful for, that increases your positive emotion and helps your well-being. Then mindful awareness. So we help people sort of be more in the moment versus sort of worrying about what's coming up or ruminating on what's already happened, but really experiencing what's in the moment and increasing their awareness of that, which also helps them engage in these other skills too. So if you're more aware of what's going on in the moment, you're more aware of the positive things as well as the negative. The next skill is positive reappraisal, and this is reframing. It's a sort of a common cognitive behavioral therapy technique where, something that you maybe initially thought was negative or initially interpreted as being a really awful thing, on sort of thinking about it further, you might see that, maybe it wasn't quite as bad as you thought. Maybe there's even something good that could come out of it. Maybe you're learning something. So it's this sort of, seeing the silver lining in the cloud, or, making lemonade from lemons. The next skill we teach folks, and this is usually done over about 5 or 6 weeks. The next skill is personal strengths. So noticing what personal resources you have to bring to the situation or to any situation. I think particularly when people are experiencing stress, sometimes it can be hard, and you can really spiral into, I'm so stressed, this is so hard, I'm not good at anything, I can't do anything here, and you get sort of this helpless spiral. And this, by noticing your personal strengths or being able to do that, you can sort of stop that spiraling and say, actually, I do have something to bring here. I do have a strength that I can apply to this situation. The next skill we talk about is sort of a SMART goals framework, attainable goals, and helping people sort of, it's a list making thing. This is one that I rely on all the time. It's something that I really, especially early in the coronavirus pandemic, when, I mean, we're still there in the US, but when we were sort of, having to work from home, having to spend each day, everyone sort of cooped up together, I would each day make a list of attainable goals. And they were sometimes really simple, get outside once, get up from my desk occasionally. Oh, maybe make some time to read a book instead of just staring at my computer screen all day. So like these sort of small attainable goals that when you achieve them, you can sort of cross them off and you get a hit of positive emotion from that. And then the last goal that was, or the last skill that was in our original package of 8 was acts of kindness. So not simply focusing on yourself, but being able to do something nice for someone else as well.
Now, Professor Moskowitz, I could imagine that by teaching people about these toolkits, it would improve their psychological aspect. But have you done any research whether it also confers benefits on their, the physical aspect?
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence from, again, observational studies where you see that people who do these types of things, people who are more grateful, tend to have better physical health, for example. So in the realm of positive psychological interventions, which is what our program is, there is less direct evidence that it impacts physical health yet. The field is still pretty new, but we're starting to see some evidence that practicing these skills can impact your physical health. In my work, we're starting to see effects on viral load in people living with HIV. So, for your listeners who aren't aware, in HIV, the goal is to have an undetectable viral load. So you want, no evidence of HIV sort of in your system. And that's the goal of treatment. And we find that people who learn these skills, compared to comparison groups who don't, control groups who don't learn the skills, the people who learn the skills are more likely to have this undetectable viral load. So that's been an exciting finding for us in the realm of HIV. Very few studies have actually had sort of these hard health outcomes, but that's what we're working toward.
Now, I'm actually doing a PhD in resilience, so there's kind of an overlap with what we do. My area is also into positive psychology. Now, I would often come across with people who are skeptic about my research area. And some people say that positive psychology is kind of an area that really paraphrases common sense. And I would imagine it would be the same experience for you. So what would you say to people who are skeptic on the research of positive affect or positive psychology in general?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple criticisms. One that you bring up, that it paraphrases common sense. Yeah, so the research confirms maybe what your grandmother would have told you. But that doesn't make it less valid or less worth engaging in. So, I mean, I think, the whole field of social psychology tends to get that criticism that, well, no kidding. Yeah, we knew this, right? But again, that's no reason to dismiss the science. The science sometimes confirms your, what your grandmother would have told you. Another really common criticism of positive psychology is that it's sort of happyology, that it just tells you to just, buck up, put a smile on your face, and that'll fix everything, which is absolutely not the case. I am really careful anytime I talk about this. And, the people in the area of positive psychology or resilience who do this work are, most are also very careful to say, this is not a cure-all. This doesn't mean that life isn't really hard and that bad things don't happen, or you should just pretend that they're not happening or suppress or deny your negative emotions. what our work shows is that people have the ability to experience positive emotions alongside the negative. So even in the midst of really extreme stress, like having a partner dying and providing care for that partner, you can experience positive emotions, and that these skills can help you sort of make the space for the positive emotions alongside the negative. So, I joke about being one of the most negative positive psychologists, because I'm always like, well, life is really hard and this is really bad. And, anytime I'm interviewed about things like, the pandemic, and people, I think, they come to me wanting me to be like, it's all going to be okay. And I'm like, no, this is really awful. Everybody's struggling. and try these things. They might help you feel a little better on a daily basis, which can help get you through. It's not a cure-all. It does not cure, major systemic problems. One of the questions we get a lot, we've done quite a bit of work with physicians and medical students, and they get really frustrated when the administration comes at them and says, you know what, just do some yoga. Here's a free yoga class for you, and that'll fix all your problems with having only 15 minutes to spend with every patient, and this really challenging electronic health record that you now have to take notes in that take longer than the time that you have with the patient, and all these sort of systemic or procedural problems that aren't going to be fixed by you noticing positive things going on in your life, right? That said, those systemic solutions take a while and are going to be, that's going to take some hard work, and you're not going to be any good to anyone if you burn out in the meantime. So if you can practice these skills, if you can, increase your positive emotion in the meantime, it will help sustain you until a solution for the bigger problems comes about.
Now, if we've traced back to from an evolutionary perspective, there are lots of research that says that we have evolved to pay attention to the negative stuff. It contributes to our safety and our survival. So don't you think that by promoting positive emotion, it's going against our evolutionary nature?
As if practicing these skills could change how we've evolved, could like walk back millions of years of evolution. I don't think so, right? It is absolutely true that, and in many cases, most cases, it's adaptive for us to pay attention to the things that are going wrong in our lives, right? Going back to, when you had a lion chasing you, like you need to notice that, right? Just because you might be noticing positive things going on in your life, or really working toward being more mindful, or engaging in more acts of kindness, or really focusing on sort of the positive aspects of behaviors that you can do, doesn't mean that you lose all your skills in coping with stress or paying attention to the negative things. I think that's sort of a straw man argument.
Okay. And what would you say to people that says that exploring about positive emotions is kind of a Polyana syndrome?
Yeah. So this is a similar thing, that by telling people that using these skills can help them cope with stress, that we're just being Pollyanna. So that that's not what we're saying. We're not saying just think positive and everything will be okay. No. I mean, so it's more about trying these skills. Try one. They don't all work for everybody, for sure. So try one or two, see what works for you, and then do that. And that can help you then sort of, stay in the coping process and cope better with whatever it is you have to cope with. So, I wouldn't, by advocating for practicing of these skills, I'm not saying just step out of life and stop trying to cope with the hard stuff. That is not it at all. Like, to pretend it's not happening. This is adding tools to your coping repertoire, so that you can cope with more and more challenging things.
Now, from my reading on for my PhD, I'm doing research on resilience. I've learned that resilience is actually not a personality trait, but it's more of a process. Would you say it's the same for positive emotion? Is there, some people will just have natural disposition for having positive emotion, or is it more of a process?
Yes to both. So we all know people who are just sort of naturally positive, and that is annoying to those of us who are naturally more negative. But it is also a skill, something you can build, a strength that you can build, this ability to engage in these skills, to have more positive emotion. So just because you're born with a certain level of positivity, a certain ability to see the positive in life, doesn't mean that you can't increase it.
You've already alluded to earlier about COVID-19, and as you've mentioned, you've been asked about it several times. So obviously, because we need more positivity. So can you talk to us about any work relating to COVID-19?
Yeah, there's actually, every day there's many more studies out there. In our work in particular, we did early in the pandemic, just talking to the members of my department here at Northwestern, and they were saying, well, is there a way that we can learn your skills? I mean, most of my funded work has to do with coping with a particular illness, just because that's how our funding, our National Institute of Health funding funds things. It tends to be very focused on particular illnesses. So that's where my studies have sort of grown up. So when our department members wanted to know if they could have access to the program, which we have put online, and so we thought, well, yeah, of course. So we sort of made a copy that was not a research version of it, for our, we call it our friends and family version of the program, where they could learn the skills online. And then, because I have a hard time not researching things, we did make a research version of it that is available to people in the US only, I'm afraid. That's our ethics board restriction. But we have made it available more broadly for the general public in the US to learn these skills.
And how does it differ from stress management? Because I would imagine that a lot of people would also say that this is some form of stress management.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's absolutely the umbrella that I work under is, as I told you, I came from the stress and coping tradition. I'm very much a student of Lazarus and Folkman, and the way they talk about coping with stress, that it's, has to do with your appraisal of the situation, and that leads to your emotional response and then a coping response. I really think of these skills as coping skills. On the other hand, by calling them coping skills, that's not to say that just about everything in life is stressful to some extent. So they can apply even in your day-to-day life in dealing with minor hassles. So it is stress management.
And can you teach these skills to children?
Yes, we've tried. And I think the skills, I put them together in this package, but they've been studied in other combinations and individually, certainly down to very young children. And I think parents can sort of be role models to teach their kids these skills. We, in terms of research, we've done it as young as high school students. We did some programs, some sort of proof of concept programs with middle schoolers. You just have to add more games to make it more fun and more interesting. And, we added, drawing and how you draw your feelings, and more on sort of emotional literacy. Something that we learned when we started working with adolescents is that it was really helpful to really talk more about emotions and labeling emotions. And then we realized that adults can use that too. So we brought that into our program for adults as well, where we talk about, because if you come in and just say positive emotions and have more positive emotions, people don't really know what that is, unless they're a psychologist or they've really learned about this. So we do a little bit about talking about emotions and the emotions you might experience under stress, to help people then engage in these skills that are trying to help them have more positive emotions.
And have you noticed if these interventions have sustained improvement of measurable outcomes, or they kind of taper off at a certain point?
Yeah, so, research studies are only funded for a certain length of time. So we've been able to follow people up to about 15 months, over a year post learning the skills. And there is some sustaining. I mean, it wanes a little bit, but doesn't go away completely, which was really good news for us, because that's how we're trying to present these skills, that it's like physical activity. You can't just do it once and be done. This is something that you practice, and you practice long term. And if you do continue practicing and make it part of your daily habit, then it will have a sustained impact on your emotional well-being. And like I said, we hypothesize physical well-being as well, although there's less evidence for that so far.
And Professor Moskowitz, personally, have you implemented any of this intervention? And if so, what's your kind of go-to regulation skills?
Yeah, my go-to has always been positive reappraisal. So I can reappraise anything from tiny to really major, and that is a skill that you develop. Like when we teach people, we don't start with, let's think about your horrific childhood. Let's reappraise your childhood. No, we don't do that. We start really simply with other things. But I, personally, dispositionally, I tended to be a positive reappraiser. So that was the one that I always went to. Again, with the pandemic, I've broadened things out. And like I used the example before of the attainable goals. I've become much more of a list maker of, each day writing down just a few things, so that I can feel like I've accomplished something when, all the days run together, and for, for months on end. So that's been one that I've really added. One of the skills that I didn't talk about yet, because it wasn't part of our original program, is self-compassion, which we've built in to our more recent programs. When we first started the self-compassion work, and Kristen Neff's work was really just coming online. And as I started seeing that work, I was like, this needs to be part of it. So self-compassion, just the ability to, acknowledge that everyone is suffering in some way, and, you are like other people, and can cut yourself some slack on that. So self-compassion is something that I've been practicing and recommending to people a lot through the pandemic. And it's just, again, this is hard for everyone. Everyone is suffering in some way. You may not be suffering the worst. You might be fortunate in that way, but it's still hard. So, give yourself some space and cut yourself some slack, and have some compassion for yourself as you're going through this.
Mm-hmm. That is really an important message to convey, especially in light of the pandemic. And it's also, if you're a mental health professional, have a bit of compassion to yourself, and give yourself extra space. Now, I would also imagine, Professor Moskowitz, that you've come across with a number of misconceptions about positive emotions. So if you can kind of identify those misconceptions and address them.
Yeah, I think one of the main ones is this sort of this toxic positivity idea that if you just think the right thoughts, think the right positive things, just be positive, then you can cure yourself, you can fix anything, you won't be stressed. And I think that's really problematic. You see this a lot, in particular with cancer. and the idea that if you're just positive enough, that you'll be fine, and that can lead to some really bad outcomes. I mean, that really, the blaming the victim is also a terrible way to talk about it, but it really blames the individual if they aren't able to be positive enough to, cure their cancer. Excuse me. So I think that's one big problem, is that sort of blaming people if they can't achieve this sort of mythical level of positiveness that fixes them. I think one big misconception, and this gets back to sort of my emotion researcher roots. One big misconception is that you're happy or you're sad, like that's one continuum, or two flip sides of the same coin. But really, our emotional experience is much more nuanced than that and much more complex. And you can be experiencing both positive and negative things almost at any given moment. So, I don't like to ask our participants or anyone, are you happy? Because that's sort of a big overarching thing. So when we ask people their emotions, we give them a list of positive and negative, and expect that people are feeling some of both. They are related a little bit, but not this sort of one-to-one perfect negative correlation that I think some people would think, right? So that's a big one, and was a big motivation for the work that I do, because we situate this intervention in the context of stress, and we study people who are experiencing significant life stress like illness. Our whole thing has been, yes, this is hard, yes, this is stressful, yes, you're probably feeling depression and distress, and that's normal. We're here to tell you that you can also feel positive emotions alongside that. So, I always say alongside or in the midst of, but that really captures it, that you can experience both. And by practicing these skills, that helps you experience the positive emotions as well, even though you're experiencing stress.
And just to be clear, you just don't work with specific population, because I heard you mention earlier you originally work with people with HIV. Is it true that you also work with the general population?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our research studies, the first trial we did testing this intervention was in people newly diagnosed with HIV, but we've since moved into people with elevated depressive symptoms, dementia caregivers. We completed one study in dementia caregivers. We're doing one now with specifically Alzheimer's caregivers, where we're testing different delivery modes of this. We do have the sort of general public version that I talked about, where we're looking at whether these skills can help people cope with. I mean, it's sort of framed around the pandemic in general, but it is just a general one for the general public. We've got a study of people with chronic pain to see whether these skills can help them in coping with pain. So, really the idea behind it is that these skills can help you have more positive emotion, no matter what kind of stress you're experiencing. And again, we look at it within particular populations because that's how our funding works. But it can work for anyone with any kind of stress.
Now, Professor Moskowitz, you gave us a good overview of the kind of research that you do. Now, we'll just try to drill down into the human side of Professor Moskowitz. So is there a particular individual or piece of writing which has the greatest influence on your work?
Oh, the greatest influence. There are a lot of my colleagues who are emotion researchers who, I met in the, early 90s, again, early to mid 90s, who've really expanded how we think about emotions, and positive emotions in particular, and resilience. So Barbara Fredrickson, Dacher Keltner, Sonia Lubomirsky, George Bonanno. Let's see, there's a bunch. Anthony Ong is doing some really exciting work in this area. Jeff Huffman, who's a psychiatrist at Harvard, is doing really great work on positive psychological interventions in medical populations. Let's see, there have been so many. Susan Folkman was my postdoc advisor and mentor, and I still talk to her fairly frequently, even though she's been retired for, I want to say 10 years now. She was a huge influence, and why I am so situated in the sort of the stress and coping framework of this. But her work in the 90s around the role of positive emotion in the stress and coping process was a huge, just huge for me, and a really foundational influence in setting me on this path to doing positive interventions.
And you clearly spend a lot of time, you've invested a lot of time with your research about positive emotions. So what's kind of the big message? What's the most important thing you want the public to know about your work and the kind of research that you do?
Let's see, the most important thing. I think it really goes back to the idea that, these skills might seem simple and fluffy and, Polyana, maybe they make you roll your eyes, say that's ridiculous. Why would I practice gratitude, or why would I try to savor a positive event? That's silly. That can't do anything in this situation that is so dark, or, that's not going to help me in my day-to-day life. We've shown that it can help. Others have shown this as well. So I think, don't dismiss the power of positive emotion and the power of practicing these skills to help you have more positive emotion in coping with whatever it is you have to cope with.
I actually use the same kind of a message when I'm explaining about my research area about resilience. I also tell that to people that maybe you don't need resilience skills, but some people would actually benefit from improving their resilience skills. So yeah, I think that's a really good message to kind of summarize your research area. Now, Professor Moskowitz, how do you relax? What's your distressing outlet?
I think it's different now, so again, with the pandemic, so no commute, I'm home 24/7 pretty much. My family's home 24/7. Something that I've started since the pandemic is walking with my friend, who's a neighbor. We wear masks and we stay 6 feet apart, but just almost every day, except when it's too cold to go outside, as it is now. We'll go out and just walk for 45 minutes, just catch up, spend some time with the dog. That's been a really nice thing to come out of the pandemic, because before we were both going off to our jobs every day, and who has time, right? So that's been nice that it's sort of slowed things down, and I've been able to spend time with her. So that's been a big de-stressor. Otherwise, I dabble in yoga, I dabble in sometimes meditation, trying those. I've never been a great meditator. I've never stuck to it, but that has changed. And I've started doing that more often too. And that's been really helpful, I think.
And what do you think you would be doing if you didn't work as a psychologist?
When I was in middle school, I took one of those tests that are supposed to tell you what you'll do, what your career should be, and mine came out to florist or preschool teacher. Neither of which I think I'd be particularly good at. Although with the florist angle, I name all my projects using plant or flower acronyms. So I guess in a way that sort of came true. So, my studies are things like iris and dahlia and daisy and lilac and orchid, larkspur, which is also a flower. So maybe the florist thing was not that far off. I would probably be in some sort of possibly a teaching role. I don't do any teaching right now. It's all research and individual mentoring. But if I weren't a psychologist, I think I'd be working with people in some other way, probably.
And finally, Professor Moskowitz, what else is in the pipeline? And if people wanted to reach out to you, what platforms can they get in touch with you at?
So I've become fairly active on Twitter. So I'm at Judy Mosk. So you can find me there. You can find out more about our lab, and that's at moskowitzlab.com, I want to say. I don't know my own lab website.
I'll double check it.
You can find it. You can find out things there. And then, my email is available as well. So you can always reach out to me directly if there are questions I can answer.
I'll put all of those links on the description notes for anyone who wants to get in touch with you in relation to your research. They could contact you. Well, Professor Moskowitz, it's been a pleasure having you here on the DRH show, but unfortunately our time is up. I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. I've enjoyed it.